Training?
Okay, the amount of training, the kind of training that you provide. All right. What else do you have? Your own, absolutely, yeah. We certainly control our own attitude. Now, whether we're going to step up to that and admit that, that's the big question. What else?
Quality of work.
Okay, the quality of work that we provide, yeah, we do. Others?
The priorities of those who report directly to me.
Okay, so you're controlling and setting their agendas as to what their priorities are. All right.
Use of time, direct control as well.
The use of time, making decisions about how you use your time. Yeah, absolutely. Good examples. Okay, so influence. What are things that you have some influence over?
Budget.
Okay, so how much budget or how it might be spent, you may have some influence on. Okay, what else? What else do you have influence over? Okay, hiring. What else?
Behaviors of people on your team.
The behaviors, maybe even attitudes of people on your team, sure.
Influence the direction of the company.
Okay, can influence the direction of the company, all right.
So you say direct control over
Influence over attitudes, over our own attitudes. Yeah, and direct control over our own attitude, influence over attitudes of others. And so what are no control examples? Okay, so we could argue, could you influence or not, but it's pretty maybe low level of influence. What else? No control.
The outcome.
The outcome. Okay, yeah, hopefully you can influence outcomes. Depends on what the outcome is, I guess. What else?
The behavior of your team when they're not with you, like they're out there representing the company and they might be on another site. And you can have trained them and done everything that you could, but you may or may not have any control over what happens. But you should have anyway. You have influence, but to a point, but then there's people that go and do their own thing no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And you have to deal with them down the road, but at that point in time, they can cause damage.
Yeah, and part of where we're a bit maybe where you're coming from as well is what you don't have control over are maybe the baggage that people might be coming into the organization with, their own personal issues or their own personal points of view, which may then lead to some behavior down the road. Now, maybe you can influence as they come in, but they come to you with maybe some baggage.
I put with the structural, the strategic organization and those techniques, some of those things you have influence over. But there's sometimes those goals that are set that you don't have a lot of influence
Okay.
over.
It may come from the board level and the really
Yeah.
high level, and you're not part of that process.
Yes, or the same thing you said for setting of some priorities. And some direction you might get around that as well. You may not have control over, although sometimes you have.
Okay. And how about the weather, Dan? Do you have control over the weather? We had some snow in Timmins, we were talking about a few days ago.
And whether if you get a violent weapons permit, change your whole.
Yes, right.
That's fine.
Sure. And in your case as well, in all of our cases, the economy and how that might impact load or how it might impact all sorts of different demands or these sort of big macroeconomic, worldwide globalization things like we've seen in the last 6 or 8 months that we really have no control over. But of course, how we respond is part of this point. We give a response. One last little piece of this that I want to touch on just for a few minutes, and then we'll break here and come back and talk about courageous conversations, is dealing with your manager or with your boss. And this one I certainly won't ask for a show of hands as to where you might be on the boss spectrum. Because of course, the boss, you can take another continuum and you can have the boss from hell over at one end, and you can have the outstanding super model, role model kind of leader at the other end. And to some extent, this is an example of where we don't have a lot of control over whether we won the boss lottery or not, whether we ended up with a good boss or not. In some cases, we may have had influence or control in the sense of whether we took the job or whether we stay in the job. But you'll see in the workbook, there's a series of ideas we'll get to momentarily, but I want to just first set the scene with this comment from Len Schlesinger. This actually was drawn out of Fast Company magazine a few years back, and there was a whole number of people, Len was one of them, that were asked to comment on and give their reflections on dealing with a bad boss. I think the title of the issue was Boss Management, and I think of it as upward leadership. But he says this, he says, in dealing with an ineffective boss, he has 3 words of advice: suck it up. And then he goes on to say, intense psychotherapy and pharmaceuticals might have an impact on your boss's behavior, but there's a fairly good chance, and I think he's a little bit radical in saying you won't have any influence, because I think you can. But the point that he's making in sort of this radical way is that we really have a few choices when dealing with an ineffective boss. We can basically put boundaries and figure out how to work within those boundaries, or what I will do or won't do, and try to manage it in that way. We can either try to work around the boss, which carries some of its dangers, or, of course, our third choice is to get out of the situation. It's a really bad one. Most people I've found, and most bosses, are typically not horrible bosses. They're often good people who aren't just very effective as leaders. They aren't providing you the direction maybe you need, the clarity, setting the priorities, a lot of the things that we've been talking about here. And so what's been your experience? Are some of the key elements, if you've got a boss that maybe isn't as strong as he or she could be, what are some of the key elements to dealing, to upward leadership? What's been your experience? So giving them feedback?
Tell them where they're not, give you what you need.
Okay, so more feedback on here's what I need, or here's the information, or whatever it may be, and trying to have that
Doesn't mean
discussion.
they'll give it to you, but
Yeah, sure, okay, so trying to make them aware at least, that where you feel you can use some more direction or help or information or whatever it may be.
Get away from the criticism and the blaming, and make it about yourself. This is what I need, this is how I would be able to do my job more effectively, as opposed to you doing this one.
Okay, yeah, so be around, again, its tone and its focus, and whether it looks like we're kind of coming at them versus more to what I need. What else have you found?
Well, sometimes it's not even tone, it's almost, you find the way that they hear you best. So if you do all of these things and they really don't hear you, then it doesn't make any difference. So somehow you have to find out where it is most effective that you communicate and how they understand.
Right.
You have to sit them down and just say, stop here for a minute. You need to hear this. I mean, it could be that direct, and other times it's actions, but to make them hear.
Yeah. So it's knowing what their style might be, their communication style might be, or something like personality type, like Myers-Briggs or something, just knowing their kind of preference and their style, and then figuring out how can I connect to that style. And of course, where it's the most challenging is when it's opposite of ours.
Yes.
That's when it's the most difficult.
share with them, don't assume that they think they know everything, like, I'll often say, gee, I just read this great book by Jim Clemmer, you should have a look at it too, or, watch this great seminar with Jim Clemmer, you should go sometime, really.
Hey, this is sounding good.
Why don't you go for the rest of the year?
Exactly, I'm already here, you know all about it.
Sure, so whether it's an article or an idea or something you've come across, and then maybe particularly if it's in an area that you'd like to get a little more help with, or feel like they maybe could use a bit more help with, you might be passing along some of those ideas.
And give positive feedback when they tell you something or when they do something that works for you.
Right.
It's like your employees.
Reinforcing. Yeah, exactly. Is that really, sometimes it's been called 360 leadership. Other times it's been called upward leadership, as well as peer leadership and leading the people on our teams. But it's paying as much attention to your relationship upward and your leadership behaviors upward as around the rest of your job. So I have put in the workbook here, pages 20 and 21 and 22, some ideas. We won't go through all of these. You can